I want to kind of return to something you said earlier, which is that you said you're setting your sights too low if you're just trying to dominate others in this life. Because I think, what we're saying here is that it's about fulfillment. It's about actually recognizing your purpose and going for that, which is unity with God, of ego death, realizing you are ultimately nothing, and then transcending this world. But still, we have some kinds of, we all have different capacities. We all have different talents, which are given to us by God. And we do exist in a world where needs need to be met. So what is the difference in the kind of spiritual theistic outlook on working in the world compared to the atheistic outlook?
I think it's to do with, part of it is to do with the purpose as to why we're doing the work in the first place.
Yeah.
I think lots of people who are trying, for example, to get to a high position in their career will want to do it because they want to attain kind of grandiosity. They want to become, the boss. They want to be the in charge of the organization. Some people want to help other people as well, and make the society a better place. But again, they're very kind of worldly, temporary intentions. Yeah. Whereas the religious, the purest kind of religious Islamic philosophy is that every act that we should do should be for the sake of God. Yeah. And should be to try and attain the pleasure of God. And ultimately try and reflect the attributes of God, of mercy, of graciousness, of all these kind of things. And I think that impacts upon morality as well. So, for example, if we were, truly fearful of God, we wouldn't lie to get to a higher position within a company, for example. Yeah. So our morality and our love for God would trump anything else. And simultaneously, we would have a trust in God that he would help us and provide for us. So like, even if you want to speak out against something wrong, then you'll do it without that fear of, these people are my providers, my employers. You'll be like, God is my provider. Exactly. So I mean, God tells us that we should go out and we should kind of make the world a better place and we should fulfill our roles within society, but we should do them with the correct intentions in mind and with the thoughts that ultimately will be accountable to God. Yeah. But not just that, we should develop a relationship with God such that we have a relationship of love for God and fear for God, so that we don't want to do anything bad, not just for threat of punishment, but just because of the devotion and the love we have for him. So then if I'm an atheistic doctor, okay, I mean, it's laudable in a sense. Yeah. But if I'm doing that work for that individual person, as well as maybe my career and my ego and my status, the work will be the same. Whereas if you have a theistic spiritual doctor who is then doing that service for other people that he knows are also the creation of God, and therefore the intention kind of comes up to God and then returns back to the world in every act of goodness that they do. It's like, I know that you're also a being of God and I want to serve you because I love God. A creation of God, not a being of God. Sorry, a creation of God. And I love God, therefore I want to serve the creation of God. Whereas if you're not that, it's kind of, there's a disconnect. Everything becomes a bit less meaningful, and your own ego, your own careerism kind of comes into it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you made at the end there, which is that your ego fills the vacuum. I've seen this a lot, where there is the outward display of doing good, but when you plummet a little bit deeper, you realize that actually there's an inner motivation to do with how are people looking at me, how are people regarding me, what's my title, how many letters do I have after my name. Right. And I think maybe individually, we have one atheistic doctor and one theistic doctor, and they have slightly different intentions. It doesn't make a difference. Overall, the patient still gets saved, all these good things.
So outwardly, it looks the same.
It looks the same. But I think on a societal level, if you have an atheistic society compared to a theistic one, a true theistic one where people, are truly kind of fearful of God.
We're not arguing for theocracy, just to be clear.
No.
All that other Muslim majority nations have this per se either.
Yeah, but I'm saying if you have a society or a collection or a group of people who are, truly religious, then the results will be much better because their intentions will always be good. There'll be less corruption. There'll be less, you can see the effects of the egotism and the other kind of vested interests on a societal level.
I mean, this comes through in academia as well. We have a friend who recently left academia at quite a high position, at least largely because he saw how much corruption and dishonesty there was in this particular field, which is a very hard science field. And he said,
I'm trying my best to think of who.
I'll tell you what.
Okay.
But he's in kind of neuroscience kind of area. and he said that you could see this deception and dishonesty of these apparently acclaimed kind of scientists and intellectuals, and that is known to be actually rife throughout. Anyone who's really embedded in academia, they'll be like, yeah, that happens, and then we wonder why we have this big replication crisis in science. What were you saying about you've even seen it on the wards? Do you feel? Have you seen that kind of in your life and in other doctors?
I work with a really nice bunch of people, to be honest. I can't really say anything negative about them, not least because they might see this. But no, obviously I wouldn't. It's because it wouldn't be professional anyway. But and they are lovely people. But I've seen it generally with professional people, which is that people are willing to do good in terms of what is socially acceptable. And what is going to be of benefit to their career. But if you ask people, are you going to be, this is just a sense, I haven't seen this per se from any individual, but I'm just getting a sense of it from people generally in society, which is that, people, if you ask people, would you be willing to say or do this thing which you think is right, but will be something which will invite negative consequences for you, right, for your career? Naturally the consequences is that people pull back from doing that. And the reason ultimately is because, again, it comes back to this question of purpose. This idea that you can be good without God is a big fallacy, because you can do good while not believing in God, but that will only work in accordance with the purpose you set for yourself. As long as it doesn't clash with the purpose you've set for yourself. If you set for yourself the purpose of getting top in your career, right, then ultimately, by definition, that is your purpose. So if anything clashes with that, it will naturally have to fall away. If a mother her whole focus in life is taking care of her kids, if she has the opportunity to save her child and she has no way of saving a child without harming another child, she will save her child, right? Because that is her purpose by definition. So you come to realize from this kind of thought experiment, which is that the only purpose that actually enables you to behave in a moral way is where your purpose is to behave in a moral way. Right? Now, the question is, what incentivizes that perspective on life? The only way to incentivize that perspective on life is a belief in God and accountability. Otherwise, at the end of the day, you can't just life is filled with suffering and difficulty, and you will be pulled away from that by the necessities of life if it's just a belief, an empty belief with no actual substance behind it, that you will be held accountable for your deeds.
And also this is made explicit in the Quran, perhaps more than any other book. There's a verse which starts by saying, God is talking to Muslims and says, you are the best people created for mankind, for the good of mankind, because you enjoin good and you forbid evil. And I think that's showing that it's not a vain boast. It's not saying, oh, Muslims are just by definition the best because they're Muslims. It's saying that the true Muslim and the true, definition of a Muslim, really, part of it is, or the true characteristic of a Muslim rather, is somebody that should enjoin good and forbid evil. So morality has to be their highest purpose, and it's that makes them the best. It's not them, being
and that's how they serve, because you've been raised as the best of people for the good of mankind. So that's how they serve mankind, is by promoting that.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, what we're talking about then is actually quite profound, because we're saying
yes, we are.
No,
it's true. It's very profound. Extraordinarily.
You can live your life in an apparently worldly way, in the sense that you have a job, you have a family, you're living your life, you're trying to do well in your career, which seems outwardly the same as the atheist, but with a spiritual perspective, it's imbued with much greater purpose. And it reminds me of this, there are many hadith Qudsi as well, which are sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, which he reported were revealed to him by God, about how someone will do apparently a good action, but God won't reward them for it in the next life because they didn't do it for God, which sounds kind of harsh when you first hear it, but then you realize God has already made a system where they've been rewarded. If you're doing that if you're giving that meal to someone who's poor because you feel like it's a good thing to do, then you have fulfilled that. And if you're doing it for their smile, then you have fulfilled that. And if you're doing that to look good in front of others, you have fulfilled that. Whatever you are doing, whatever you are inputting, you're getting the output already.
Because you did it for a worldly purpose. The world purpose was fulfilled.
It's been served.
Yeah.
But if you do it for God, then God rewards you in the next life. So you get all the things in this life as well, but you also get stuff in the next life, and you get a relationship with God. So everything you do becomes imbued with purpose and weight. Whereas if you have this kind of atheistic outlook, everything kind of washes away into kind of vapidity and kind of and meaninglessness, which is amazing, because it means that any individual can actually seek to have a spiritual life and live a normal life. But that normal life takes on a much more
heightened sense of meaning.
Yeah, and it becomes suddenly much more profound, even though it's just, maybe you're just working as an Uber driver with your family and trying to eke out a living while going to the mosque and praying at night. That life, which may seem like nothing, actually, every greeting that you give to your customers may actually be something which brings you rewards in the next life and enhances your relationship with God. So everything becomes so much more real.
And also that remembrance of God, whereby you're remembering God before doing an action, and you're doing a good action. God says that it's in the remembrance of God that hearts can find contentment. And I think it's also very beautiful, because it shows that whatever our situation, whether we're rich or poor, whatever circumstance we've been brought up, whether we're a quadriplegic or anything like that, God has given equal opportunity for everybody, in a way, to attain self-contentment within themselves.
Yeah,
and
it's not dependent on your muscles or whatever.
And the extraordinary thing is, it's actually got nothing to do with material accumulation. It's actually all got to do with your relationship with God.
Yeah,
and that's something that you just need to basically turn to God in your heart and speak to God, and that door is open for you. So it is extraordinary how people run around looking for that. And it's so close. It's so close. It's just so close. But they haven't got a clue that it's there. And this is what Allah says in the Quran. It says Allah is closer to you than your life artery. Right? But people don't realize it.
And it's also, if you want true motivation, that's true motivation, because the dark side of the kind of self-improvement crowd is that in reality, most people are not going to get
That was
rich.
extremely nasal.
They're not going to get rich. They're not going to. They may be working a really long, hard job where they don't have time to properly work out, or they don't have the mental resources to be on it all the time and improving themselves. Like, you can't just. Not everyone can do that. And with this kind of crowd, you could end up feeling like a failure if you can't, even though it's potentially actually kind of structurally beyond you, or it would require you to be so exceptional. Whereas with this kind of outlook, you can live a fairly ordinary life, but actually be extraordinary.
And this outlook also promotes some of the things that the self-improvement crowds do touch upon, such as discipline and such as routine.
Yeah.
And through things like 5 times daily prayer that Islam kind of prescribes, that provides, even if you do very little else in a day, the fact that you've prayed 5 times in a day is quite quite an achievement. It's quite a good routine and a disciplined thing.
And then fasted for a month in Ramadan. Give charity, out of your income on a regular basis. And in actual fact, the structure of Islam is such that I was reading a sermon by the second Khalifa of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in this book, excellent book called Mashal-e-Ra, The Beacon of Truth. Beacon of Truth? Beacon of Youth? Mashal-e-Ra. I wish I knew Urdu better. Anyway, and one of the, I'm towards the end of it, Beacon of Youth, I think it is. And he goes, towards the end of the book, he talks about why is it that the West has degenerated in its worship of God? Why is religion degenerated? And he says it's because their religion do not prescribe anything for the body. So he talks in this thing a lot about how the body and the soul both need to be engaged in worship. And in fact, one protects the other. The prostration of the spirit gives meaning to the prostration of the body with it. But the prostration of the body secures the foundations and protects the prostration of the soul, which is that because we have in Islam a set of postures and set times to do it and instruction to do it in congregation with other human beings. So there's a degree of accountability there within your local community as well. Because of all these things, it means that, mosques are populated throughout the world. But because the Christians just have this notion of prayer, which is just, you just turn to God in your heart and you start talking to God while you're gardening or while you're doing the lawn mowing, etc. And then that's your worship for the day. Because there's no formulaic or formal worship. The consequence is that, you can just say, well, I've done it, And so the habit is lost. So, and that goes for all of our things. For example, he talks also about how the act of doing good to others is formalized through charity. Charity has becomes a symbol in Islam that you have done good to your fellow human being.
And zakat is a necessary.
And zakat is
pillar of
not
faith.
is a necessary part of pillar of faith. Whereas in Christianity, it's good to give charity. Yeah, it's great. Is it mandatory? Is anything mandatory?
Is worship mandatory?
Is worship mandatory? Nothing's mandatory.
Like developing a relationship with anybody, whether it's human or whether it's God, requires regularity and requires discipline. You can't think if I just go, twice a year to church or twice a year to, see somebody, we're going to have a deep and close relationship.
No, exactly.
It requires a discipline. And I was also thinking about the GPT answer that it gave about finding happiness. And one of the things was about building relationships with others, positive relationships. And through prayer, that's one way, because I've personally made many friends just by kind of praying with them regularly, and then you kind of grow to meet them and you grow and build a community. And a lot of people are missing that kind of community spirit today because in a way the society lacks it.
Yeah.
And
the best you can do is go play tennis with them or something, or,
Yeah, that's fun. That is good.
Yeah.
It's a different way.
But it's not a kind of a shared engagement in something meaningful.
Yeah.
Like prayer is.
And again, building the meaning and purpose, which is also what ChatGPT said. Gratitude. There's nobody to practice gratitude to. I think that was one of the answers.
Yeah.
If you're in an atheistic world, you can be grateful to other people. You can be grateful to,
But can you really? Because most of them
beings.
believe, the hardened atheists intellectually don't believe we have free will. So, no one had the ability to not do good to you anyway. So what are you being grateful for?
Yeah. They're generally grateful, aren't they? But not to a specific, thing. There's no target for their gratitude. Whereas, we have that.